We're into our fourth and probably not final lecture on Hamlet, simply because we've gone overtime a few times because of the plays. And I want to pick up where we left off last time with the play within the play, because we've seen in this play, but we've seen actually throughout all the plays, that this is a major, it's not even a theme, it's a device that Shakespeare uses to reflect his view of not only his own conduct as a playwright, but his sense of his purpose in life to some degree, about acting and directing, and to some degree cultural formation. And upon reflection, it goes all the way back to the Genesis mandate of creating a culture. It's about culture formation. The commandment to Adam and Eve is to exercise dominion over the earth, right? They've been created in the image of God and so forth. And to till the garden and to cultivate it and be fruitful and multiply and to subdue the earth and so forth. It's about subduing it. And Adam's failure in Genesis 3 is to subdue the serpent. He fails to do what he was called to do there. It's not just Eve's failure because she listened to the serpent. He has failed to subdue this creature, the serpent. And so it's Shakespeare reflects on the garden metaphor all the time. The unweeded gardens, has gardens gone to seed. He also uses this metaphor of the stage, and it's very much of a reflexive enterprise because he's talking about what he's doing as well. But it particularly applies to the character of Hamlet, because Hamlet is a character set on a stage, the stage being Denmark, in which he has been, his role of agency has been removed from him by his uncle's murder of his father, and yet he seems incapable of action. And there are various foils for him. I'm going to talk about that. I've mentioned already several times, but they'll come particularly relevant today, because we'll look at Laertes and we'll look at Fortinbras and so forth, and how they are foils for Hamlet, and they're capable of action in ways that he is not. Hamlet is a dramaturge figure that, for his purposes, seems incapable even then of orchestrating things the way he wants to. And it's actually a great mystery in the play. Why will not Hamlet act? Because he's quite convinced after this scene that we're about to read, when the play is presented in front of the king, and the king is demonstrably guilty, and he sees it, and others see it. Yes, Claudius has demonstrated that his guilt publicly. Well, why won't he act then? It's a question that is hard to answer. Hamlet's inability to act. But one of the scenes that will come up is that he does not want to. It's in scene 4 or in scene 3, Act 3, scene 3. He finds Claudius on his knees in prayer, and he doesn't want to take his vengeance right at that point, because there would be it wouldn't be just. His father has gone to hell because he was not fit or prepared for death, whereas Claudius, who murdered him, is now in prayer and therefore will presumably go to heaven, and he sees there's an injustice in this, so he's not willing to take his vengeance at that time. So he wants a perfect, orderly universe. So it's part of his dominion mandate that he's to exercise in order to act properly, but he seems to be so committed to it that he sees that he's the only instrument for it. He's lost sight of God, in other words. He has to have perfection himself. He needs to bring it about. Hamlet's a sort of perfectionist, which is, again, is not out of keeping with the sort of procrastinator that he is. One of the reasons people procrastinate is because things are not the way they would like them to be, and they just want to get things more in order before they hand in their essays. Right? I haven't finished yet. I need more time. because it's not perfect. And that time of perfection never comes. Hamlet is not, so his uncle is now clearly guilty. He's seen his guilt. He is kneeling before him. He could slay him. He doesn't do it because it's not quite perfect. The timing's not right because it's the situation isn't there. So until it's a perfect situation, he's unwilling to act. That's where we will meet him in a few brief lines. But I'm going to go back to the words that he said that we left off with. Again, he says, and when he's directing the actors and how they should act, he says, do not o'erstep not the modesty of nature. And the end of nature, both at the first and now, when he says both at the first, he's talking all the way back to the Garden of Eden. That's at the first and now, was and is to hold as toward the mirror up to nature, to show virtue, her feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. Now, scorn her own image. What's her own image? Well, it's his fallen image. He's reflecting on it now as somebody after the fall, to scorn the image of the sinful creature and to show and to reflect on virtuous conduct and act that way, and furthermore to represent and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. So there's a moral didactic function to the artist and the actor. And it's very strongly presented by Hamlet there. So he's an idealist in his view of the theater. He's very, very strong on it. If anything, Hamlet is very strong and thorough in his convictions and is absolutely committed to them. And he's more serious about the theater than he seems to be about anything else, which probably would again reflect Shakespeare and his views, presumably. And he calls the bad actors nature's journeymen. They cast an imperfect vision of the human image, whereas a good actor can recreate in his actions and follow the footsteps of God himself and bring about an ordering, a restoring of creation. Of course, that's what Hamlet wants to do. And of course, that's what God himself does do, and we've reflected on it both in the comedies and the tragedies. There's always an orderly ending. And that reflects Shakespeare's view that that's what God is, a God of order. And so the playwright also has to reflect that in his plays. And Hamlet insists on that to do otherwise is to misrepresent his own vocation and fall short of it. So it's a very high view of the calling of the artist, and Hamlet represents it. Now, we'll see in Act 3, Scene 2 here, there is a dumb show. Now, the dumb show is like mime. They're not speaking. When the dumb show is introduced in the play, and this is lines 140 and so forth, the play Act 3, Scene 2, a dumb show is brought in here, and Hamlet seems upset at the fact that there's a dumb show. It's not entirely clear why that is. Is it because he doesn't expect it? Remember, he approves of the script, but now there's a dumb show. What's so upsetting about that? Is it because he doesn't expect it, or is it because he's just trying to get Claudius's attention, so he's pretending himself? Because the dumb show is going to very clearly show a man pouring poison in his brother's ear, and is Hamlet trying to deceive Claudius? I'm upset at this. What am I saying? Or is he trying to draw attention to this very scene and agitate Claudius, because they're both aware that they know what's going on at this point, but neither of them can expose one another. I don't know. But it's unclear why he responds so to this. Is it meant to be part of the plot? It's not clear. But what is clear is that Claudius gets it really clearly. He understands very plainly what is going on in the dumb show. So I'll pick it up, line 260, where Lucianus pours poison in the king's ear, and Hamlet responds and says, poisons him in the garden for his estate. His name is Gonzago. The story is extant and written in very choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. And then Ophelia says, the king rises. And then Hamlet, what? Frighted with false fire? And then the queen says to Claudius, how fares my lord? Polonius, give o'er the play. Give me some light. Away. And then Polonius calls out, lights, lights, lights. And then they all dash out, except for Hamlet and Horatio. He's so distraught at what he sees. And then Hamlet to Horatio asks him whether he marked what he saw. Didst perceive, 287, as in, because he'd asked him, you keep an eye on Claudius and you tell me whether he demonstrated the guilt that we're both pretty sure he did. Didst perceive him? Very well, my lord. Upon the talk of the poisoning, I did very well note him. Aha! Come, some music, come the recorders. For if the king likes not the comedy, why then belike he likes it not, perdie. Come, some music. Now Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern come in. But the play scene here has now revealed Claudius's malicious intentions and malicious actions. He's seen, the mirror has been held up to nature, and Claudius has seen himself in it, and his guilt has been plainly demonstrated to all who can see it. So it's a really interesting thing. He's watching a theatrical performance, but as if he's looking in his own soul, and that everyone around him can now watch him. And that reflects directly on the lines that Shakespeare has just given us of holding the mirror up to nature and to show her, right? And yes.
So I noticed that Hamlet's changed the meter of his speech there. Do you think that's significant?
You do.
Yes, I do.
Yes, and so do I, of course. He's a little settled, a little order. Aha! Good, it worked.
But he also seems a little unsettled in the way that it reads as well. Like, so it's kind of a bit of a mix there. Like he's settled, but he's also...
Well, he's agitated, he's excited. Because it worked. I mean, I'm just speculating, but because you're forced to speculate. But you... always with meter and so forth, you note that it is meter where it wasn't, and then it is, and where it was metrical and it loses that, you notice it, and they say, why is it suddenly? I mean, Shakespeare hasn't suddenly lost his facility to write metrical language. He's chosen to let it go. Why is he doing that? And it's often to express a psychological change in the character. And again, with Shakespeare, it's not just psychology. There will be a moral shifting, either evil thoughts, evil intentions, or aha, things seem to fit now. There's a purpose and meaning to life, and yes, and there's a sense of design, and I've got it, and that's more or less here. But he's very excited, you're right, and the meter, although it is clear, is a little bit disjointed. And the other issue in this speech is Hamlet has inserted speech himself into the lines, and we don't know which lines he inserted. But he did actually ask to write part of the script and was permitted to do so. And the question is, what did he write and in what manner did he write it? And maybe that's why he was agitated, because I didn't write that. Like, that wasn't in the original script. What are you doing? I'm the playwright. How dare you? Are you going to mess things up here? Again. But his earlier speech, that is Claudius's, that foul deeds must rise, or is it Hamlet's speech, is evident here. So the speech, is it lines 192 to 221? Most necessary 'tis that we forget to pay ourselves what to ourselves is debt. What to ourselves is in passion we propose, the passion ending doth the purpose lose, etc., etc. But these are the voices of the player king, and note they're all in rhyming couplets. Did he write these lines, or did he write the lines 261 to 267? I mean, these are just suggestions. And the ones that I just commented on here, in the accusations of, by the way, in those lines that I just cited, 192 and onwards to 221, they're an explicit accusation and a warning to his mother and to himself, because they're directed at the son as well as the mother in the Player King's speech. Did he write those? Again, it's not clear. But the consequences of this scene are clear, because Hamlet will go on then to murder, except he doesn't get the right guy. But now he's finally capable of action. And when he does act, he stabs Polonius, who's behind the curtain, the heiress. He sticks him, and he doesn't even know who it is. He thinks it might be the king. But now, so that one consequence is clear. And then there's a confrontation with his mother, and he challenges her in her thinking on this. I'm going to skip over the Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern Act 3, Scene 3. They're now sent off to try and bring about Hamlet's demise. But the king sends them off, and then King Claudius has his own soliloquy. "Oh, my offense is rank. It smells to heaven. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it." Cain slaying his brother Abel is what is meant here. "A brother's murder. Pray can I not, though inclination be as sharp as will. My stronger guilt defeats my strong intent, and like a man to double business bound, I stand in pause where I shall first begin, and both neglect. What if this cursed hand were thicker than itself with brother's blood? Is there not rain enough in the sweet heavens to wash it white as snow? Whereto serves mercy but to confront the visage of offense?" So there are theological reflections here on, could he not repent? Is there not mercy enough in heaven to wash the blood off my hand? Because how wide and deep and vast is God's mercy? Is there not grace and mercy enough? There is. It's a back and forth theological disquisition within the mind of King Claudius, and at the end of all of which he kneels, and then Hamlet walks in and sees him kneeling. And Hamlet's response to this opportunity that arises, line 72, "Now might I do it. Pat, now I is a praying, and now I'll do it. And so it goes to heaven, and so am I revenged." That would be scanned. A villain kills my father, and for that, I, his sole son, do this same villain send to heaven? Why, this is hire and salary, not revenge. I took my father grossly, full of bread, with all his crimes broad blown, as flush as May, and how this audit stands, who knows save heaven? The audit, the listening. He's praying, who knows how his words are being answered. But in our circumstance and course of thought, 'tis heavy with him. And am I then revenged, to take him in the purging of his soul, when he is fit and seasoned for his passage? No. Up sword, and know thou a more horrid hent. When he is drunk, asleep, or in his rage, or in the incestuous pleasure of his bed, at game, a swearing, or about some act that has no relish of salvation in it, then trip him, and his heels may kick at heaven, and that his soul may be as damned in blackness hell whereto it goes. My mother stays this physic, but prolongs thy sickly days. So he decides that he will delay in his vengeance, because the time's not right, as I say. And of course, what he doesn't know is what the king will say right after this, is that he can't pray. Can't really. He says, the king says, "My words fly up, my thoughts remain below." It's not true repentance. He can say the words, but actually he's not willing to have a true confession. If he had a true confession, he would confess his guilt. He would give up the spoils of his ill deeds, which would mean his wife Claudius and the kingdom of Denmark. He's not willing to do that. He is aware of how gross his offense is. It is the sin of Cain. Yes. Though the words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. Now, isn't that interesting? Even that. King Claudius expresses an understanding of the inner life of a human being which contemporary literary theory denies. Contemporary literary theory says that we have no access to our thoughts outside of language. Language is the only means that we have of knowing anything. The king here expresses a disjuncture between thoughts and words. So we can think something and we can speak something and they can diverge. And therefore I can speak hypocritically. I can lie, I can know one thing and say another. And what really matters is what I am thinking, where my soul lies, not what my words are saying. And the only one who has access to my thoughts is God. Nobody else has access to them. They only have access through my words. Scripture enjoins us that let our words be as our thoughts. There's an integrity there, but we can diverge in them. And King Claudius knows that here and expresses that. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. But as I say, Hamlet wants a too perfect vengeance, and so he's unwilling to kill him in this state. He wants him to go to hell. Now, in this, would he have vengeance? Would he actually have vengeance? Would he really reorder the kingdom of Denmark if he sent his uncle to hell intentionally? Would he not be a wicked man himself if he did such a thing, even though he did this to his father? And the answer is yes, he would. So Hamlet's own character here is clearly in question. He's so angry and upset about the murder of his father and the complicity of his mother in the whole offense that he is incapable of a good action. If you think about it that way. So fine, he won't kill him because he wants him to go to hell. Wanting to send somebody to hell is yourself to have hellish intentions. And it would not reflect an orderly ending to the play, even if that were the end of the play. We would now have a wicked man on the throne. And he's not there. He's not. He's still in the throes or the depths of his own anger and despair here. He's not yet willing to act on and leave it to God. We will see when he comes to the fifth act that he transforms. The character of Hamlet has transformed. He's no longer requiring that everything be absolutely concluded by him, the dramaturge figure. He's going to leave some things to God to finish. Right? It's the difference between the modern conception of social justice, where we have to bring about everything justly and allow no things to let hang and let God be the ultimate judge in the last days. Everyone will stand before God's presence. And Shakespeare's conception of justice, which is we do the best we can, we err on the side of grace rather than justice, and at the end of the day, God will get everything right when everyone stands before them, right? But Hamlet is acting as if there is no God right now. Because otherwise, he would consider his own actions. At any rate,
sort of along the lines of how Bell thinks everything works out in the end?
No.
Same kind of theology?
No, it's. Oh, you mean that Hamlet has right now?
Yeah. Or that Shakespeare's kind of holding on to that God will work it all out in the end.
Rob Bell's position isn't. I don't know. Is it Hamlet's position? You mean in his outright heresy here?
No, just that everything that only because only God knows and only God is capable of judging that we.
No, it's not true. No. Well, first of all, it's not only God that's capable of judging. We're called to judge. It's just that, and God endorses human judgments and says that we will judge even angels, don't you know? We will judge, and we're called upon to judge. We're required to judge. It's just that all human judgments are necessarily provisional and cannot capture the entirety of the picture, but we are required to, otherwise there would be no law and order. And then you have to undergo a due process. There's a trial by jury, and there's the preponderance of evidence, innocent until proven guilty, all those things. But you are required to do that. But at the end of the day, we can't see inside a person's heart, and we may not receive all the evidence. And at the end of the day, then, God will come and will give a just judgment. And it's not the earthly court's judgment, it's his judgment. But there is supposed to be a mirroring of earthly judgment with divine judgment, and that's the attempt. So Rob Bell's sense there that, well, we can't know and it's up to God. Well, this is just lawlessness. This is okay? Yeah. And Shakespeare would never endorse that, and no person of any substance would ever endorse that. It's an appalling view. That's all I can say. It's terrible. Theologically and otherwise, it's like to give up all responsibility. It's just again in Shakespeare's mind, it's just there's a necessity to judge, right? We saw that in Measure for Measure. He was lax, he was unwilling to act. You can't have that. You got to act. But if you overdo it, then you err on the other side, and then you get a tyrannical regime, executing people for, a jot or a tittle being broken. Like, silly, you're going to execute this man Claudio for impregnating his fiancée, and they could be even considered to be married, and yet you're going to murder him, you're going to execute him for that, but there's a necessity for judgment. Okay? Anyway, in scene 4, Gertrude and Polonius speak for a bit, and then Hamlet comes in. And there's a little exchange, and this is helpful because I've said one of the things that's disordered in Hamlet's life is not just that he's lost his father, but it's that his mother seems to have been so quickly engaged or married to the man who did the murdering. He just finds this baffling. It disrupts him so badly that it's almost worse than losing his father. I think it spills over into his relationship with poor Ophelia. He's upset at the female sex. But so I'm going to look at the exchange a little second here. Now, mother, what's the matter? Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Referring to Claudius. Hamlet, mother, you have my father much offended. Referring to the deceased Hamlet. Elder Hamlet. Come, you answer with an idle tongue. Go, you question with a wicked tongue. Why, how now, Hamlet? What's the matter now? Have you forgot me, as in, do you not know who I am? I'm your mother. No, by the rood, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife, and would it were not so, you are my mother. Those are very hurtful words. Nay, then I'll set those to you that can speak. Come, and sit you down. You shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you. Now again, it's holding the mirror up to nature. Claudius has seen, and he didn't like what he saw. Now you're going to have a look. What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me. Help! Ho! His mother, being a bit of a drama queen, in addition to the Queen of Denmark, calls out as if he were going to murder her, because obviously the scene's not set by Shakespeare, but Hamlet's being very rough with his mother. I mean, the language suggests it, and he's forcibly sitting her down. Are you going to murder me? And then Polonius, who's hiding behind the arras, what? Ho, help! And then Hamlet draws his sword. How now, a rat? Dead for a ducat dead. And then sticks the sword through it, and then the immortal line, Polonius, oh, I am slain. Oh me, what hast thou done? Nay, I know not, says Hamlet. Is it the king? Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this. A bloody deed, almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother. So now it's just a little bit of the blame game. As kill a king Ay, lady, it was my word. Parts the heiress and discovers Polonius. Thou wretched, rash, intruding fool, farewell, I took thee for thy better. Take thy fortune, thou find'st it to be too busy is some danger. Leave wringing of your hands, peace. Sit you down now to his mother, and let me wring your heart. For so I shall, if it be made of penetrable stuff, if damned custom have not brassed it so that it be proof and bulwark against sense. What have I done, that thou darest wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me? Such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty, calls virtue hypocrite, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love, and sets a blister there, makes marriage vows as false as dicer's oaths. Oh, such a deed as from the body of contraction plucks the very soul, and sweet religion makes a rhapsody of words. Heaven's face does glow o'er this solidity and compound mass with heated visage, as against the doom it is thick thought sick at the act. Ay me, what act? What roars so loud and thunders in the index? And now he probably has around his neck a picture of his father in one of those clasps. You open it up and there are pictures of his father. A locket. I was trying to find the word. Yeah, there's a locket, and he opens it up and he says, look here upon this picture. And on this, the counterfeit presentment of two brothers. See what a grace was seated on this brow. Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars, to threaten and command a station like the herald Mercury new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill. A combination and a form indeed where every god did seem to set his seal to give the world assurance of a man. This was your husband. Look you now what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear, blasting his wholesome brother. Again, the sign of his guilt, the poison he poured into his brother. He is, in comparison, he's just the ear, and is a one that's been poisoned and corrupted. Like a mildewed ear, blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? Have you eyes? You cannot call it love. For at your age, the heyday in the blood is tame, it's humble, and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this? Sense, sure you have, else could you not have motion? Aristotelian terminology here. But sure that sense is apoplexed, for madness would not err, nor sense to ecstasy was ne'er so thralled, but it reserved some quantity of choice to serve in such a difference. What devil was it that thus hath cozened you at a hoodman blind? Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling, sans all, or but a sickly part of one true sense, could not so mope. Oh, shame, where is thy blush? Rebellious hell, if thou canst mutiny in a matron's bones, and to flaming youth let virtue be as wax, and melt in her own fire. Proclaim no shame when the compulsion ardor gives the charge, since frost itself is actively doth burn, and reason panders will. Hamlet, the queen. Oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turn'st my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their taint. She feels guilty. Feels convicted by what he says. Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love o'er the nasty sty. Oh, speak to me no more. These words like daggers enter in my ears. No more, sweet Hamlet. A murderer and a villain, a slave that is not a 20th part the tithe of your precedent, Lord, a vice of kings, a cut purse on the empire and the rule, that from a shelf the precious diadem stole and put it in his pocket. No more. And now the Hamlet's ghost comes in, the father, and gets involved in this. Now, tells him to remember. And one of the things he asks him to remember is to be merciful to the mother. Funny, the father comes in and counsels him to be mercy. Now, Hamlet addresses the ghost because he sees him, the mother does not. She thinks her son is truly mad. Says, a king of shreds and patches, and then the pause. He sees the ghost. Save me and hover o'er me with your wings, you heavenly guards. What would your gracious figure? Alas, he's mad. Do you not come your tardy son to chide, etc.? Do not forget. This visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose. In other words, get on with it. I'm here because you're not acting. But look, amazement on thy mother sits. Oh, step between her and her fighting soul. Conceit in weakest body's strongest works. Speak to her, Hamlet. Be compassionate. Take pity on your mother. And then, how is it with you, lady? Alas, how is it with you? That you do bend your eye on vacancy, and with the incorporeal air do hold discourse. Forth at your eyes your spirits wildly peep, and as the sleeping soldiers in the alarm, your bedded hair like life in excrements, start up and stand an end. O gentle son, upon the heat and flame of thy distemper, sprinkle cool patience. Whereon do you look? On him, on him. He sees the ghost, she doesn't. And later she says, the very coinage of your brain. You made it all up. You're mad. The line 137. It's the very coinage of your brain. This bodiless creation, ecstasy is very cunning in. Ecstasy. My pulse, as yours, doth temperately keep time. I'm not upset. And makes us healthful music. Okay. The music of the spheres is a reflection of harmony. He is very orderly in his thoughts. He's not mad. He's not morally insane. There's nothing. He's not psychologically perturbed. The only distress he sees is in seeing her moral depravity in sleeping with her father's murderer, his father's murderer, her husband's murderer. But he's calm and he's peaceable and he has a sense of harmony and peace and so forth. Music is a reflection of that. Bring me to the test, and I the matter will reword which madness would gamble from. Mother, for love of grace, lay not that flattering unction to your soul, that not your trespass but my madness speaks. Don't evade me by blame shifting and suggesting that I'm mad and you're not morally sick, because that is the issue here. And at the end of this speech, and he says, forgive me this my virtue, for in the fatness of these pursy times, virtue itself of vice must pardon beg. Yea, curb and woo for leave to do him good. O Hamlet, thou hast cleft my heart in twain. Good, he says. Good. That was the whole purpose of this. That was the purpose of holding the mirror up to nature, to correct you. He wants his mother back. He wants the relation restored. Oh, throw away the worser part of it, and live the purer with the other half. Good night, but go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not. That monster custom who all sense doth eat, of habits devil, is angel yet in this, that to the use of actions fair and good he likewise gives a frock or livery that aptly is put on. Refrain tonight, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence, the next more easy, for use almost can change the stamp of nature, and either the devil or throw him out with wondrous potency. So make a habit of not going to bed with my uncle. You'll find it hard the first day, but then it'll get a little easier. And this is the counsel to the addict. You need to cultivate habits of virtue. I'm speaking in chapel on Thursday on cultivating good habits, reading scripture rather than your cell phone. It's about this. There are actual habits to inculcate. If you do these things, you will find it easier. Once more, good night. And when you are desirous to be blessed, I'll blessing beg of you at that point. For this same Lord, pointing to Polonius, I do repent, but heaven hath pleased it so to punish me with this. Aha. He's aware. He's not innocent of this man's blood. He shed a man's blood. It was an innocent man, as it turned out. Heaven hath pleased it so to punish me with this, and this with me, that I must be their scourge and minister. I will bestow him, and will answer well the death I gave him. So again, good night. I must be cruel only to be kind. This bad begins and worse remains behind. One more word, good lady, what shall I do? Not this, by no means, what I bid you do. Let the bloat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him, for a pair of reechy kisses or paddling in your neck with his damned fingers, make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. 'Twere good you let him know. For who that's but a queen, fair, sober, wise, would from a paddock, from a bat, a jib, such dear concernings hide? Who would do so? No, in spite of sense and secrecy, unpeg the casket on the house's top, let the birds fly, and like the famous ape, to try conclusions in the basket creep, to break your own neck down. Be assured, if words be made of breath, says the queen, and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me. Aha. There's a bond restored. Trust. She's faithful to her son, not to her now husband. Established. She's given her word, just as he gave his word to his deceased father. There's a covenant that's been pledged here. So there's the restoration promise, the hopeful note of the tragedy. Hamlet is about to fix things. I must to England, you know that? Alack, I had forgot. 'Tis so concluded on. There's letters sealed, and my two schoolfellows, whom I will trust as I will adders fanged, they bear the mandate. They must sweep my way and marshal me to knavery. So Hamlet is in on, he knows that his old buddies, Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern, are going to send him to his death or to his imprisonment, whatever. Doesn't trust them for a bit, and he's going to take care of them. Now, in this, he does. Again, a bad turn to them. Does he have to kill Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern? He could just not go on the boat, but does he really have to send in the letters saying the bearer of this note, which is what they're going to bring, the bearer of this note, take care of them? Is that necessary? No, he gets vengeance. Is it not a malicious act? I think it is. He's got out of their trap. Does that mean he has to have them murdered in cold blood? I think not. He's worried about Claudius's soul. How about their souls? This is an angry young man. So there's a complex character here. By the way, the scene where Hamlet refuses to act and avenge his father, I can't take questions today just because I have no time or comments. When Hamlet won't kill Claudius, why does he do so? The great critic A.C. Bradley says it's because Hamlet it's not a direct quote, he's a gentleman. Can't kill a man while he's on his knees. And Hamlet's a gentleman, he's a good sport, he's not going to, hit him when he's at a disadvantage. He's going to let him get up on his feet and pull out his sword and so forth and be a fair fight. I don't think this is even remotely plausible. It's the mind of the great Edwardian critic in an age when professions of theological importance were just discarded as irrelevant. The obvious reason is what another critic by the name of Kitto says. He refuses for the very reasons he tells us. He wants to bring about perfect justice. He wants his uncle to be damned. That's why. He's trying to be an instrument of divine justice as well as human justice. He wants perfection, and in that he wants too much. But this last scene where he's with his mother is important because it's reestablishing something of the order. He's still doing bad things. He won't kill Claudius because he wants him to go to hell. He does kill Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern to send them to hell. This is not good. But as for his mother, he's put her back in a right relationship with him, and so this is the beginning of a change. And when he kills Polonius, does he really mean to kill King Claudius? Because he says he does. I mistook thee for thy better. Does he mean this, or does he say it for Gertrude's benefit? I don't know. It's possible. But it seems at this stage that Hamlet can only act without thinking. And that is not the example of the Renaissance man that Hamlet, or rather Shakespeare, wants him to be. And the example of the man in an orderly world, a moral agent, he thinks and he acts, and the two are, there's an integrity to the two. At the moment, Hamlet acts without thinking, and he can only act without thinking. And further, he does so to bring about malicious intentions. It's not a good thing. But Hamlet's almost like a missionary to his mother's soul at this point. So there's a contradiction there. And this is the horrible scene when he's grabbing hold of her, and I said I've seen on stage in the Stratford Theatre him on top of his mother, the Oedipus complex thing going on. It's just like, come on, really. I mean, his relationship with his mother is surely complex, but it's like, really? It's a sexual thing with his mother, and he really and he feels guilty, and he can't do what his father wanted because he really wanted to kill his father himself, like Oedipus. There's this secret subconscious desire. I mean, literally, that's what the Freudian critics have suggested as the motivation. I just think it's just ridiculous. But he's trying to restore things. Now, Sir Philip Sidney says that tragedy should show the greatest, should open the greatest ulcers and show the uncertainty on which the world is based as a prerequisite to healing it. So that's what tragedy ought to do. It ought to show the greatest wounds of our moral nature in order to show the uncertainty of the world, because it's rooted that like sin is in the created order now, but only in order to heal it. That's what a tragedy should do, says Sidney. Sidney, Defense of Poetry. Contemporary with Shakespeare, Shakespeare would wholly agree. That's what's going on here. And the purpose of the tragedy is to heal it. It's a Christian view of what tragedy does. So he's certainly not your typical revenge hero. He's not willing to take vengeance. He wants to restore order in a Christian fashion. Everything must be right, but he's certainly not thinking like one here. But he leaves off with, as I say, with Gertrude, and expresses his views of, in some ways, being an instrument of divine justice. As for Claudius, his character motives are somewhat important. Did he do it just for power? Did he do it out of love for the queen? Those are the two obvious options. Did he lust after the throne, or did he lust after the queen, or is it a bit of both? It seems to me that it is a bit of both. When he has the power, he's unwilling to exercise it like let's go back to Macbeth. Macbeth is going to get rid of all threats to his rule at this point. He's unwilling to do that if it's going to mean that Gertrude is alienated from him. He wants the whole picture. So he's got the kingship, and he also has the wife, but maybe he only wanted the wife. And the only way to do it was to get rid of his brother. And in the process, he became the king. I don't know. But clearly the love motivation is real for Claudius. She's a central figure in the whole scheme of things here. So when Hamlet restores his mother to him and breaks her relationship with Claudius, this is an important moment in the play. And it changes everything, the dynamics of the relationship. So he's coming closer to dealing with the deep ulcer in his nature. And part of that is expressed through his melancholy, his depression, we would call it. And he's making a progression as a character, as a moral agent, and he's healing those ulcers at this point. By winning his mother over, it seems to be setting things right. Unfortunately, on the way, he's done terrible things that he's going to be answerable for, and one of them is killing Polonius, and he says that he'll be accountable for it. He doesn't diminish it. So these are internal obstacles, and in his final soliloquies, we will see that he has made progress as a character in reordering his moral view of the universe. But he's also now got external obstacles because Claudius is plainly aware of his intentions, and it's now out in the open, pretty much. And after he kills Polonius, the king is going to say, that could have been me. And so now he must be taken care of, and he can openly act against him. Even if it's excused as madness, he cannot be allowed to act in this fashion. He's got to be locked up. Now, the way in which Claudius decides he's going to take care of it is through the instrument of another revenge hero, and that is Laertes. Because Laertes has now lost a father at the hand of Hamlet and wants his own vengeance. And he, unlike Hamlet, is quite clear of who the evildoer is and how just his cause is. And he's willing to do it, and he said he would cut his throat in a chapel. Compare and contrast that with Hamlet. When his uncle's on his knees, he won't kill him. Laertes says if he's in a chapel, I'll cut his throat. Doesn't matter. That's how angry he is. But Gertrude is now supportive of Hamlet, but her actions are a little ambiguous. And again, this seems to be seems to be fairly realistic. She's not a brave woman. She's faithful, but I don't think she's courageous. And she sort of stands between him and Laertes, and so there's ambiguity even in her actions, which I think are reflective of how people would actually genuinely act. She's not openly going to defy Claudius. And she's probably also secretly wondering with whether Hamlet actually is mad. Because he's speaking into the air, remember. I mean, we know that Hamlet's not mad because we see the ghost on stage, but she doesn't know that. Act 4, Scene 3. And this is Hamlet acting, knowing that he has the reputation for madness. He uses this to allude to his knowledge of Claudius's guilt and his desire to punish him for it, but he does it under the auspices of madness, so he's not held accountable for it. So this is very useful. When people account you mad, you can say things that are genuinely truthful and yet disclaim responsibility for it. And so he uses this to his advantage. And again, this is manipulative. And now Hamlet and Claudius' relationship is just purely that of power politics. And in power politics, moral considerations go out the window. And it really is nasty stuff at this point. As I say, he dispatches Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern. He dispatches Polonius. In this, his hands are dirty. He's not the white knight here. He's the dark knight. He's Batman. Hamlet is Batman. He is getting his hands very, very dirty indeed. And that's not ideal from Shakespeare's vantage point. For his view of the life, he's not willing to allow his heroes to be the Machiavellian politicians. These are not good guys. You can't do the right things with the wrong motives. It happens, but it's not excusable. It's not acceptable. And note that he doesn't leave us there with that, and he wouldn't. Now, we, in a contemporary dramatic production, they probably would. So Hamlet learns his lesson about how the world really works, and he starts acting just like the other guy, and he becomes as corrupt as the other guy, and so on. And then the play concludes, right? And that he got his vengeance, and he wins, but he's as bad as the guy he replaced. That would be a contemporary dramatic production. Shakespeare does not leave it at that. I also want to come to the Ophelia, because for me this is one of the great... Oh, I have to mention Scene 4, because this comes in. We began with Fortinbras, and he's been in the background up to this point, but he's still there, and he is now marching towards Denmark. So Act 4, Scene 4, Enter Fortinbras with his army over the stage. Go, captain, from me greet the Danish king. Tell him that by his license Fortinbras craves the conveyance of a promised march over his kingdom. You know the rendezvous. If that his majesty would with us, we shall express our duty in his eye, and let him know so. I will do it, my lord. Go softly on. And they all go out except the captain. Now Hamlet comes in, Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern. Good sir, whose powers are these? Captain, they are of Norway, sir. How purposed, sir, I pray you, 'gainst some part of Poland, says the captain. Who commands them, sir, the nephew to old Norway? Fortinbras. Goes it against the main of Poland, sir, or to some frontier? Truly to speak, and with no addition, we go to gain a little patch of ground that hath in it no profit but the name to pay 5 ducats. 5! I would not farm it, nor will it yield to Norway or the Pole a ranker rate, would it be sold in fee. So you're going to go conquer a little patch of ground that's worthless. You can't even farm it. It's worth nothing. That's what we're going to capture. Hamlet, why then the Polak never will defend it? Yes, it is already garrisoned. 2,000 souls and 20,000 ducats will not debate the question of this straw. This is the impostum of much wealth and peace, that inward breaks and shows no cause without why the man dies. I humbly thank you, sir. Comment on politics. People get caught up in wars over absolutely nothing, and they're willing to throw away money and lives. So it's a moral commentary. On politics, God by you, sir. Will it please you go, my lord? And then Hamlet, I'll be with you straight. Go a little while. Now he's commenting on Fortinbras. That's why I'm come to this speech. Oh, how all occasions do inform against me, and spur my dull revenge. What is a man, if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, this is his definition of a man. He gets it from the ancient tragedy, and a human being is somebody who looks before and after. In other words, he has a memory and a sense of history and time. That's his sense of identity. A man who looks before and after. Gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fuss in us unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, now he's accusing himself. Is it because I have a craven scruple that I'm unwilling to act, so I'm a coward? Or is it because I think too precisely on the event? I think it's the latter. He wants everything to be perfect. For whatever reason, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom, forever 3 parts coward. So if I'm not a man of action, I'm not a man. I need to be both a man of thought and action. So he's accusing himself. I do not know why yet I live to say, this thing's to do, sith I have cause, and will, and strength, and means to do it. Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass and charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. How stand I then, that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep, while to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men, that for a fantasy and a trick of fame go to their graves like beds, fight for a plot whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. Oh, from this time forth my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth. So it's the example of Fortinbras that inspires him here. Here's the man of action who will do it for nothing. He judges him to some degree. It's an unfit cause. You ought not to do this. On the other hand, there's a good example here. Here's a man of action. I too will be a man of action. So all of these things are spurring him and pushing him in the right direction. Nonetheless, Ophelia, Act 4, Scene 5. There's a madness scene, and this is the sympathy for Ophelia as a character has been building throughout the play, I think. She's likable. She's beloved by her brother. She's beloved by her sister. She was beloved by Hamlet. He's spoken to her monstrously. She's caught up in the intrigues of the court. And she is a girl without a role, and yet she, unlike Hamlet, has no means to carve herself out a role. She can't be the dramaturge figure. She's the puppet on other people's strings. And in the end, it's not that they don't care for her, it's just that there are too many things going on for them to worry about her. And she is desperate. And in the end, dies. When I say desperate, she despairs. She has no hope that it can resolve itself. Her father's death will be one of the things that incites it. The fact that her beloved, Hamlet's the one that did it, will make it that much worse. The fact that Hamlet now deserves to be executed for it will probably not bring her much comfort. She probably still loves Hamlet. The fact that her brother's going to come back and take vengeance won't make her any happier either. It's a mess, and she can't do anything about it. So she feels powerless, and I think powerlessness is certainly an incitement to all sorts of depression and thoughts of suicide. The fact that you feel like you can't change the situation. So she's a powerless character, and we have much sympathy for her. And it's now just power politics. People don't care about the people around them. So we've got Hamlet, and we got Claudius, and only one of them is going to remain standing, and everyone around them is in danger at this stage. But she is one of Shakespeare's most complete victims. Her fall comes not from her own actions, but from the actions of others. So she suffers the actions of others. There's a sense of pathos, which comes from pathan, passion. We feel a sense of pity in relation to her. Everybody pities poor Ophelia because she's the sufferer of actions. Actions are the opposite of the passion. The passion is the suffering of the Christ. It's not referring to his emotions. It's referring to the fact that he suffers the actions of others. And the feelings that have been growing, our sympathies for Ophelia, are now about to be punctured by her downfall. But in another sense, she is like Hamlet. She is a victim of Claudius's crime. And we've already seen this throughout our plays when the figure of authority, the king, goes wrong, other people suffer. The king himself suffers, but so do others around them. So there cannot be a good for the common people if the figures in authority are not themselves acting rightly. And so she's a victim of the circumstance of living in Denmark around the court of Claudius. And Hamlet, she's such a powerful figure, I think, in the play, even though she's not an actor, she's a sufferer of action, that she almost replaces Hamlet in the audience's sympathy for a few scenes. She steals the show. She's extraordinary. And she's a foil for Hamlet in that sense. We have more sympathy for her. When I say she steals the show, in the end, Hamlet jumps into the grave to say how much his love for Ophelia exceeds Laertes, and they're going to fight over who loves her more. It's very strange. So very complex relationships going on here. I don't think that Hamlet is disingenuous. He has nothing to gain by it. Or maybe he does. Maybe he thinks that Laertes will let him off the hook if he jumps. I don't know. But I think that would be more disingenuous than I see the character of Hamlet being. But she replaces Hamlet as the tragic figure. And compared to other tragic heroines, she is a very weak character. She's compliant, she's passive, she accepts what she's given, and she's totally manipulated. If Ophelia were the only heroine that Shakespeare had, you would say that Shakespeare presents very weak female figures indeed. But she's not. She's nothing like it. But she certainly wants, so if you look at the spectrum of female characters, she's on the very weak end. And yet some of the most likable female character for all that. Ophelia doesn't choose love, by the way. She's forced to comply with others. She doesn't have that option. She wanted to do that, by the way, and she was counseled away from it by her father and her brother, by the fact that Hamlet himself can't choose whom he loves. She accepts their counsel. Is Hamlet upset because of his mother or because of Ophelia rebuffs him? Was Hamlet really as bound by his princely state as the others said he was? Ophelia could have talked to Hamlet, but she didn't. And I don't think, quite plausibly, she acts in the only way that was open to her, plausibly, and so does he. They're both caught in, there's almost a fatalism about this. They had no choice. They were pushed into the roles in which they acted, and that's one of the reasons we have such sympathy for her. She didn't do anything wrong. She made no wrong decisions at all. And when Hamlet murders her father, maybe she feels partly responsible. If he's mad, she's the one who drove him to madness. She feels guilty about it. Unlike Hamlet, she doesn't have the creativity or the imagination or the place in court as a man to be able to act and to circumvent the circumstances around her. She has to be the dutiful daughter. So she's even more fragmented than Hamlet is. And her loss of reason is more sudden and total than Hamlet. So if Hamlet feigns madness and in some ways acts like he is mad, Ophelia really loses it. She actually does. I think she loses all capacity for acting in a self-controlled fashion. And that's because everything around her is that fragmented. She's a reflection of the state of Denmark at this point. Act 4, Scene 5, lines 7 to 14 suggests that she might have something in her that nonetheless is not as mad as all that. So she says, so the gentleman, what's the report? Enter Horatio, the Queen Gertrude, and a gentleman. And Queen says, I will not speak with her. She wants to speak to the Queen, as in Ophelia. Gentlemen, she is importunate, indeed distract. Her mood will needs be pitied. What would she have? She speaks much of her father. Says she hears there's tricks of the world, and hems and beats her heart. Spurns enviously at straws, at nothing. Speaks things in doubt that carry but half sense. Her speech is nothing. Yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearers to collection. They yawn at it and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts, which as her winks and nods and gestures yield them, indeed would make one think there might be thought, though nothing sure, yet much unhappily. Horatio, 'twere good she were spoken with, for she may strew dangerous conjectures in ill-breeding minds. So Horatio, something of the pastor in him, you need to speak to her. You can't leave her in this state. This won't end well. You should speak to her. Hamlet, the Queen, let her come in. And then aside, to my sick soul, as sin's true nature is, each toy seems prologue to some great amiss. So full of artless jealousy is guilt, it spills itself in fearing to be spilt. And then Ophelia comes in and says some very strange things, and the king comes in as well, and they then orchestrate things, and there's really strange conduct. Look at her speech. There's a little bit of, she's quoting poetic lines, and so she has orderly speech, but when she speaks for herself, her lines are unordered. Right? So she's quoting from lines that suggest an order when she's singing a song or whatever, taking scraps from other thing, but when she comes to speak herself, line 68, Act 4, Scene 4, I hope all will be well. We must be patient, but I cannot choose but weep to think that we would lay him in the cold ground. My brother shall know of it, and so I thank you for your good counsel. Come, my coach. Good night, ladies. Good night. Sweet ladies, good night. Good night. the king, follow her close. Give her good watch, I pray you, to Horatio. She appears mad to everyone. And the king acts as if he were concerned about her, etc. On with that. And she's gone mad at Polonius' death. Laertes come in, and now Laertes is going to be the sword in King Claudius' hand. He's fit and ripe for judgment, and he will act upon the dramaturge figurings of the king. So Laertes comes in, and Laertes wants vengeance. Act 4, Scene 5, line 112. Where is this king? Sirs, stand you all without. No, let's come in. Laertes, I pray you, give me leave. We will, we will. I thank you. Keep the door. All of Laertes' followers go out. O thou vile king, give me my father. Calmly, good Laertes, says the queen. That drop of blood that's calm proclaims me bastard. Cries cuckold to my father, brands the harlot even here between the chaste, unsmirched brow of my true mother. What's the cause, Laertes, of that thy rebellion looks so giant-like? Let him go, Gertrude. Do not fear our person. There's such divinity doth hedge a king that treason can but peep to what it would, acts little of his will. Tell me, Laertes, why thou art thus incensed. Let him go, Gertrude. Speak, man. Where is my father? Dead. But not by him. As I say, the complexity of Gertrude's character. She doesn't want him to be hurt. Doesn't want anyone to be hurt. Again, it's a bit like Ophelia. She has feelings for all of them. She doesn't want anyone to be hurt. Even though she feels guilty herself, she's not actually, there's no justice in her. Very plausible as a character. Let him demand his fill. King's a little bit more willing for justice. How came he dead? I'll not be juggled with. To hell, allegiance, vows to the blackest devil, conscience and grace to the profoundest fit. I dare damnation. To this point I stand, that both the worlds I give to negligence, let come what comes. Only I'll be revenged most thoroughly for my father. Who will stay you? My will, not all. The worlds, and for my means I'll husband them so they shall go far with little. Good Laertes, if you desire to know the certainty of your dear father, is writ in your revenge that swoop-stake you will draw both friend and foe, winner and loser, none but his enemies. Will you know them then? To his good friends, thus wide I'll ope my arms, and like the kind life-rendering pelican, repass them with my blood. Again, this in medieval iconography, the pen is biting its side and feeding its young from its own lifeblood. A figure of Christ, by the way. Christ presented as a pelican in medieval thing. Like, what? Whoever thought of it? There's a strange view that pelicans bite their own bosom and feed their young with the blood. Why now you speak like a good child and a true gentleman. I am guiltless of your father's death, and am most sensibly in grief for it, and it shall as level to your judgment appear as day does to your eye. Let her come in. And who is it? It's Ophelia. And Ophelia appears mad here. The king and Laertes will pick it up in scene 7, and sets him now on the course of vengeance. And they contrive how they're going to bring this about. Claudius offers him Hamlet in order to fulfill his revenge. His revenge motive, here's the man on which you can exercise your just sense of wrath. And Claudius's plot now involves treachery. And he's going to show how Laertes, and it shows how blinded Laertes is this. He's merely a tool. And he doesn't know the truth of the whole picture. And Laertes, again, this speech, I'd cut his throat in the church, is directly in contrast to Hamlet's refusal to execute the king when he was in prayer. But Laertes they're going to have a sword fight. It's a duel. It's about honor. Okay. Laertes uses an unbated sword. So this is a duel for honor. The baited sword it'll have a tip on it. Like today in fencing, if at the Olympic sports, they have a tip on it that'll prevent you from running the other man through. Claudius' suggestion is that they take the tip off the sword, off Laertes' sword. So you get him once and he's done. Laertes adds to it and says, let me put poison on it and make sure of it. So they're both wicked. It's not just that they want vengeance, they're willing to go to any means to get their vengeance. And so they're now wicked characters. The one suggests, okay, so here's a contest and we'll let God decide, etc. But it's gonna be on unfair grounds, and Hamlet's unknowing of this. Now they're both acting the way Hamlet's just act in sending men to not only to their deaths, but to hell. The moral considerations they've set aside. And the corruption of Claudius is now clear on Laertes. He, up to this point, was a very honorable man. And he will, in the end, appear one because he will repent of what he did and admit that there was poison on it in the king. So he confesses on his deathbed in the same way that we saw back in King Lear, Edmund did. He tried to make things right in the end, restitution. But at this point, they're both wicked characters because, again, they're willing to get vengeance by any means and all means, just like Hamlet is, or with Rosenkrantz and Guildenstern. So Act 5 begins, and if I got time, I may not, I've got 2 minutes, with the graveyard scene. And this is a famous scene, and I'm probably going to start on and have to pick it up next time. But Hamlet is in the graveyard with Horatio, and why is this in the play? It's a funny old scene. It really is. Like, why go to the graveyard? Well, I mean, we know that Ophelia's died, and that's why we're in the graveyard. But it explores why does Shakespeare put in it? It's enough Ophelia died from this. This is a tragic thing. We would feel sufficient passion and pathos for this poor, dear Ophelia and leave it at that. You don't need to go to the graveyard to have this graveyard scene. It seems a distraction from the play. But he puts it in here, and it seems there are 2 reasons for it. And one of them is to explore the subject of death and what follows it, right from the very beginning of the play. This is a troubling thing for him. He's seen his father's ghost. His father's ghost, who's described something like a state of purgatory or hell, and yet he's able to arise from it. That doesn't really fit in with his theology. It's led Hamlet to the point where he wonders whether there's any God in the universe at all. And it's led him to commit immoral action. So he's still thinking about death. And as Hamlet is thinking about death, so is the audience. And the audience is also on the same journey that Hamlet is. So that's the first thing. And the other is it's going to bring to a conclusion the tragedy of Ophelia, a little tragedy within the tragedy. She's a sufficiently important character, even though she is a sufferer of action and not really an agent per se, to Shakespeare, that he's going to want to draw that to a conclusion. So she's a really big character. She might not be a strong character in the sense of the feminist. She's an admirable role model, but she is in the sense that everybody is going to recognize the tragedy of Ophelia in the same way they do Dido, a famous literary heroine here. And so we're going to draw that to a conclusion. Now, the gravediggers echo some of Hamlet's own sentiments. So there are 2 gravediggers, and there's a little bit of the fool about them. There's wisdom in them, and there's joking. And so it's gallows humor to some degree. You know, when people are about to face death themselves, they're often very jocular and lighthearted in the way they speak and so forth. Now they're facing death and the death of others, and they're very, this is a fact of life. They're not appealing to the Lion King circle of life type stuff, and they're not singing joyous songs, but it's more there's something funny about this in the midst of death. And I will have to pick it up next time, so I'll not do it any good service if I deal with it now. But I'm going to have to pick up Hamlet next time. We will begin on Othello, because that's on the docket, and I don't want to curtail it too much. But I'm going to finish Hamlet first.